Hello and welcome to this channel. This is VFitter University. We are the world's first practical university, and we're focusing on the existing knowledge in the world and AI simulations to basically make those knowledge practical. We are here today with Lardner, and I'll let you introduce yourself and we could go from there.
Sure. My background, I started in the mortgage insurance game in the late 1990s, and we were processing lots of real estate information, property information. From there, I went back to school and studied statistics and learned how to build appraisal models or automated valuation models. And from there, it's just blossomed into a career that works primarily in media now, using data and analytics and converting that real estate data and analytics into meaningful narratives and stories.
Awesome. This is perfect. So Kent, I'm very interested in your data science background, and I think in our company, we are basically doing the same thing. We deal with a lot of clients that they have a lot of data, and we basically use them in a simulation, in AI simulation, and we would get practical results, practical information to potentially teach their future workforce. So can you tell us how you guys are adapting AI, if you're using it, or what do you think about it in general?
Yes, it's been a fascinating journey so far. I've tried to adopt ChatGPT from day one. My first iteration or uses of it were prior to Code Interpreter, which I think they now call advanced data analytics. But my first use was to use it as a journalist, as a property journalist. So what I would do is it would feed it data tables through a standard interface. I would coach it or train it, prime it on how to interpret that data, and then convert that into narratives or articles. So whether that be a fully fledged report for the media, which went out as a press release, or whether it be social content, etc. So it worked very well and certainly emulated what a journalist would do very, very quickly. What I found at a practical level was that it didn't hallucinate because we were giving it the data. What I found specifically in the early days and still do is if you use it to collect or collate and produce any data points, fact-based points, that's where the hallucination came in. So the next round of opportunities or products that we created from it were to create fairly advanced prompts that had all of the location-based data, the property trends data, and fed that into the prompt. So the prompt itself was the mother of all prompts with all of the data needed, and then all of the interpretation and instructions on how to interpret that data and what we then wanted from it. So from one prompt, we could generate a very extensive market report, for example. So that was the second thing. And then moving on from there, Code Interpreter came along and things really started to open up.
Nice. So I heard you said hallucination because it's so funny in AI industry, it's either called hallucination or creativity at the same time. How do you guide the model to basically not hallucinate and still be creative around the constitutional parameters that we specify for the prompt? So
look, I'm playing around with the settings. Obviously, you can configure it accordingly. So setting that heat or whatever the different products call it different things, but you know, that setting, turning the dial up or down, is the key. But even with that adjustment, I found a lot of data and facts were being jumbled up. One of the biggest issues I found was in a number of the third-party models that have evolved up until and prior to GPTs, the private GPTs from OpenAI, was that giving them large CSV data tables or text tables and expecting it to behave looking up a suburb. So I would give it 10,000 suburbs with multiple columns of data and asking it to do lookups effectively. And it didn't do a good job at all, no matter what. So along comes GPT and the ability to upload an Excel file, an example as part of the training, and it's working very well.
Oh wow, so that's interesting. So there's also a mixture of search and GPTs that would make everything much more interesting because GPTs are not, they have reasoning, they don't search well. If you do one-step search before processing it with GPTs, it's ultimate workflow that we're using in our simulations.
I agree. Building out reports, what I've been doing is prompting it one task at a time. Look up this, look up that to build up an economic report, for example. Go and look up and verify the source, make sure it works well, make sure it's accurate. And then progressively go step through and you can talk to multiple websites, bring back and retrieve the data in one chat session, and then ask it to help you write a report on what it's opened up and consumed in that one session. And that's working very well.
Exactly. Can you please dive into the specifications of that report? What are the data what are the micro calculations, the data that you're asking for the real estate specific?
Yeah, there's a few scenarios that I'm using. So at the suburban real estate content level, I don't ask it to produce any analytics other than the data that goes in and then analyze that and then reprocess that. So I don't ask it to go off and grab any market facts on real estate, as an example. So I give it multiple data points and then work from it. But what I am doing is I'm asking Jeep to find locale information, so that general information about local amenities or schools or universities, etc. That seems to be a good blend. So when it comes to real estate market facts, I'm giving it that data, but when it comes to locale information, university, schools, parks, I'm requesting that it process or retrieve that and then blend the two together to create news content.
This is perfect. So when you're giving the local data, are you using geospatial geographical numbers or do you give the name of that place?
A little bit of both. I'm finding that there's not a lot of capability other than in some cases where you might use, say, R through Code Interpreter, showing the old Code Interpreter name, sorry about that. But there are some geospatial functions that you can get from it, but by and large, I don't think it's there yet. Or I haven't learned how to fully utilize that geospatial. So it's not exactly a QGIS type platform at this stage, but I think it's only a matter of time.
Exactly.
So I think once it turns the corner and becomes a geospatial tool, I believe the next step for it, I believe this could happen now, where if you give it lat longs for properties, I believe through a very detailed prompt, you could make it work like an automated valuation model, where it would retrieve comparable sales using Lydian distances. It could do all of that quite well, those calculations extremely well. What it could then do, and this is going back to my first phase of my career, was building these automated valuation models. We couldn't really use free text or use some of those functions that are now emerging as standard features in large language models. I'm of the opinion now that a lot of these computer-aided price assessment tools, or AVMs, will be able to start to use GPT models and use them to help match on the qualitative variables rather than only the quantitative variables, which is what we've been traditionally bound to when matching properties. So that's where the human would always come in, and the human would always have the ability to match based on quality differences or views or other qualitative variables. I believe that we're at the turning point now where these GPT models will be able to do that.
Beautiful. So that will help not basically disrupt the whole job economy at the same time, because you will still need human being to validate the quality, constitutional or the actual response of the model.
Our roles change. So an appraiser, as you would call it in North America, or evaluate in Australia, for example, the role is the last line of defence in the mortgage process. So they would always perform that QA check, because these models go wrong, they go terribly wrong. Just that they will improve in a larger proportion of cases. So hallucination will be significant and costly for a bank if you don't have that professional doing that final QA check. The difference being is, the difference between an appraiser maybe visiting or doing 3 or 4 jobs per day, now they could do 6 or 7.
Exactly. That's so facts. One more thing that we also do is that we realized in like an OpenAI conference that you tell the model that they're not good at specific things, they're not going to go that way. And it's awesome. Like, I understood that. I've been telling, for example, GPTs that, like, I don't want you to create URLs because you're bad at that. You'll hallucinate and the URL wouldn't be correct. So that's one way of like a constitutional way. And also we use map data. You said lat and long, but think about this. If we actually feed it like an image of the map of that specific location, it would extract text with like an API, and then it would read that location very easily with the names and like the close areas. It's something that we do.
Oh, well, I've learned just now, so thank you. Instructing it what it's not good at. I've never tried that before, so I'm going to go away today and start using that immediately. Awesome. Thank you. With regards to the maps, I've been experimenting with that so far. Typically, in most geospatial, we've got very accurate data sets that tell us distance to beaches, etc., etc. But there are some things that are not captured in geospatial database that can better be captured from aerial image or a LiDAR image or other. Experiment I'm looking at is there are some measures, standard measures like Cook's distance or others, that measures that look for influential observations or look for odd distributions. So if you're looking at shape of data going into models or before you use it in models, I'm of the opinion, I haven't tested it yet, I'm of the opinion that if I can create a graph, an image of the shape of the data, there might be something in it. We might be able to describe a suburb based on the graphical representation of its price distribution.
Yes, exactly. Because you worked with a lot of geospatial data, and one thing we realized is that, for example, if you get it from ArcGIS API, you can get like a future server, which is not it can't be interpreted by a large language model. It's still like a bunch of like numbers, but it could be interpreted by like AI because it's colorful. At the same time, like, how would you take that knowledge and bring it to AI in words, basically, right? Image vision was something that we came to conclusion, and like, because if you use Google APIs for places, you get word data, but it's not as historical as we want it. For example, for real estate use cases, right? For example, ArcGIS has a lot of like states and like formation, everything from that location, but we still have to interpret that for AI, which comes to the API. But like,
I think that's going to be the next fascinating frontier. I remember filling in a survey on, that OpenAI sent out, and the number one thing I said is, we need to open up its capabilities into the geospatial world.
Exactly.
And I think it may already exist. I just don't know how to use it yet.
Exactly.
But the opportunities will open up.
But at the same time, I'm thinking like geospatial researches and like things around geospatial is the most practical thing on this earth, because we can solve earthquakes, we can solve many natural disasters. It's very useful.
Well, I think finding unique patterns, going back to the neural networks, the foundation for these. And this is an interesting story. I won't mention the product, but I was using one of those products where you could upload your data sets, and it would run off and test thousands of model permutations and come back with a neural network or a random, whatever. Just broadly call it a neural network. And a lot of these software platforms would take anything from 5 minutes to 5 hours to train. Some of them would take you a long time, and you would pay different amounts of money for different processing capability. And then along came Code Interpreter, and I put them up side by side with the same tasks. And Code Interpreter, by all the statistical accounts, all those statistics metrics, delivered a very solid model, if not better than the ML product. But it did it in 3 or 4 minutes. And the other model was still running 2 hours later. And it was a subscription service. So I wasn't using the free inline platform. I was paying $20 or $30 a month. And here along comes ChatGPT, and I was paying $20 a month, and it was delivering it in a fraction of the time and a superior output. So there's some really interesting things there. So I think, to your point, when we're dealing with these extremely large data sets, it just becomes hard for a human to interpret it. And I think we could understand a nice simple linear regression model, but when it became multiple regression, I think we start to struggle. And then when we move to neural networks, it's opaque at best. So I think that's where these models really come into their own, is the ability to take these vast quantities of data and then split it up into meaningful, powerful models, and stitch them all back together.
And like the next step after interpretation of that data, I feel like is to simulate it with different scenarios and like hypothetical stuff to know if like the end result is what we need, and do it to dedicate resources to it or no.
I think that's a really interesting point. Yeah, the Monte Carlo stuff, gosh, that was going back to school days, but those simulation models, I think we'll test it for the hallucination issues that we will have. And I think with them, to that layer prior to the transformer, is that these neural networks are grossly overfitted. We all know that. So when they go wrong, in that very small percentage of case, they go extremely wrong. And I think that's what could help us put some guardrails as to what the input values can be and what shouldn't be used. So we can kind of some parameters as to where you can and you should not use these models.
Awesome. I'm not plugging my own thing in, but know that we figured that out in our platform. So instead of one giant input of like chat, you would have like variables that you would fill in, and then you press on simulate. So very interesting. And like realize that like the whole large language model's main task is to simulate, right? And the creativity hallucination can come in very effectively. Let me give give you an example, like in insurance industry, have salespeople who talk to these people and like the insurance products, but they don't know what is the right product. If they have to ask ICP, what is your age, how many kids do you have, and they have to put that input, and then the model would simulate the right products to offer to that person. For example, if they have kids, then they would offer it right amount of
The beauty of that is that can be an online calculator. So suddenly all of these online calculators that we've been experiencing become GPTs. So I'm rather excited about the OpenAI, which was only last week. I'm currently spinning up a number of buyer guides for cities. So if you're a home buyer and you're looking at a certain city, I'm giving it all of the property data to avoid hallucination. So whether rent prices and yields and house prices and price distributions, I'm feeding it all of that, but then leaving the rest to the model. So I think that could be a very similar use case to what you just explained. So because a lot of people who talk about insurance, a lot of people who are moving outside of area need to understand if insurance costs are extremely high in those locations, especially with a lot of the sea change, tree change movement. And insurance can be quite high in a lot of areas in the tropics of Australia, as one example of many. So I think capturing all of these broader data sets could be the perfect for some of these GPTs.
Interesting. Let's talk about a little bit of education, like your company. How do you educate your future workforce, and how do you scale?
The scale bit is probably the easier one to answer. I think that the scale through the use of AI is the key for me. If I can't want my number one employee to be ChatGPT, which it is, right? So I think that's the number one for me. Have that distributed workforce is how I scale. I think the gig economy, the ability to expand that with relationships with people that I've known for 15 years, understand the data better than most. One of the challenges I found with employees, bringing them on board, is how do I hand over 20 years of domain knowledge to somebody? Hard to do. So you want to identify certain tasks that they can do quickly. The challenge now for the workforce is that use case that I explained of when I give somebody a task that they're good at, and 95% is not good enough with what we do. We need it to be, yes, sometimes you make an error, but we can't accept a routine 95% error rate. We need to be Six Sigma, right? That's what we do. And we always call that there are always anomalies in the data, which then convert. So I think that the staffing issue is going to be interesting in what we do, because our number one employee will always be ChatGPT moving forward. Number one. Is the next piece. I think broadly, I'm part of a few companies that I consult to and part of ongoing in their teams, and I've got a lot of training sessions. We're just doing what we're doing now, and just doing that a little bit face to face, and we're doing it online, and training the team as much as possible. So, for example, one of those is a big national appraisal firm, valuation firm, and they have been so solid with their training. We're doing lunchtime training sessions a few months, so that was good. And then we just finished a 2-day training session in New Zealand. Just came back a couple of days ago. So a lot of companies have to have or maintain points to maintain their certifications. So like a lot of CPD. So you need to maintain training to meet qualification certification. So that's a handy bit for a lot of industries as well, because they have to focus on this methodically.
Interesting. That actually proves my point about the whole university concept, because we believe that universities, as like single in the world, that they don't have access to all the confidential information to all these businesses, so they can't really teach the knowledge, They teach normal knowledge, like well education, but how do they test that? How do they make it practical with quiz, with grades? But for example, you wouldn't really care if they only bring you the grades and like the quizzes. You would want to train them again, right? You would want to teach them the practical knowledge that is useful in your business. So what we do is we are like an interactive platform. It's like a university, and we put modern exponential softwares in and it's super practical. We learn the practical workflows of these businesses, and we use exponential software like AI, Figma, for example, all these new that are AI generated, AI powered, and we do them one by one, like in a pipeline. It could be a workshop, it could be like one-on session, it could be on-site, it could be like a whole keynote. But what do you think? Like, would you rely on a university like that?
Well, I love that from a practical perspective. I still love the theory. My bookshelf behind me is full of the original texts when I went to school, because, and what I really appreciate more now, more than ever, is that when we pick on statistics, we couldn't touch the calculator. I'm showing my age, but they wouldn't let us go near the statistics calculator until we learned how to formulate on paper. So right back to regression models, multiple regression models, any of those. So to learn how to work things out, the basic principles of things, distributions of data and whatnot, all by hand first. So we understood the foundation before we jumped into using the calculators. And then we had to master the calculator before we moved on to the software. So it was building blocks of understanding the basic principles, or you go back to, say, operations and understanding linear programming, etc. The concern I have now is if you bypass all of that theoretical stuff and we go straight to AI, what I'm seeing in the practical realm today, as much as I love the practical realm, I think they need to go together. And one of the scenarios I'm seeing playing out is people coming out and portraying themselves in my domain, say property data analyst, and they've used ChatGPT for 2 weeks. They did a 2-week training course to become a buyer's agent, whatever it might be, and within a few weeks they're portraying themselves as experts in property data analytics or calling themselves a data scientist.
Oh wow.
And this is happening at scale in Australia at the moment. And if they know how to present themselves well, and they know how to market, and they know how to use social media, they'll do a better job of presenting themselves as an expert than an old guy like me. And that's a challenge.
I see what you mean. Okay, because a very weird experience with my university. I paid almost like 60,000 pounds in international students to my university, and gonna get the best education in VFX, right? So it's like computer stuff and programming. I didn't, so I really went to university. I became the teacher assistant because I was keep telling teachers like, this is wrong. This could be better easily, be done better easily. And we had presentations that I would simply say there's a software that could do that in 10 seconds, right? Did you know? Have you heard about it? So in this exponential world, I feel like, for my university at least, it took 2 years to adapt, right? To install those software, have people training it. So how do you think I have a theory, I respect the system, but think about this, they're very slow. They're not exponential.
Yeah, I would argue that might come down to the school itself. So, university has got its own culture, but then each school has a very different, distinct culture and approach to how they like to teach. So, the school might approach things very differently to the School of Statistics, etc., or software engineering. So I think it really comes down to the culture of that school and whether they want to adapt and teach cutting-edge technology real time. And if that school itself has that culture, then they just need to employ the right lecturers and professors that are going to do that. So I couldn't make a blanket statement about every university or college across the world. I just, know that there were some schools and some lecturers and professors in my school that had cutting edge. They were looking at the most recent software that they couldn't, and it had only been out for a few months, and they were testing it in practice sessions.
Interesting. Oh, wow. Okay, so what are your thoughts on someone who wants to get into the workforce right now on real estate, and would you recommend them to go to university, or do you have a better plan?
I think if they're going into real estate, depends on what part. If they're going into real estate sales, they just need to do a private course through one of the, it's real estate institutes have courses, others there. So there are different courses there. If somebody wanted to move into data and analytics in this space, I'm helping the Australian Property Institute develop a course on data analytics, everything just covered. So it would be worth looking at if they're in Australia. Now, around the rest of the world, I guess there's just different courses out there. You just need to find the course that aligns with what you want to do. Property and geospatial, I think there's a lot more in that geospatial area in terms of courses and training. That's been around and it's fairly sophisticated. But as data sets become a little bit more open and accessible, I could see more and more people being drawn via that path and learning how to build out geospatial data and interpret and use that. That would be very, very powerful. That's a space that I see as a bit of a gap in my world as well. So if I were to kind of time back, I would have gone down and included that in my journey. Absolutely.
Awesome. Any words for the audience?
Oh, look, what you're doing, I think the practical side of it is amazing. I think keeping with a lot of these GPTs is pivotal. What I'm probably finding now is there are some CEOs of companies around Australia that get it and others that don't. So my tip would be if the GPT and this space is what's interesting to you, that's probably why you're listening to the podcast, just make sure you find a company that's on with it, because it starts with the CEO. If the CEO is not on board, is an out-of-touch boomer, good luck. So you just want to find the right CEO.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Kent. This was one of the best conversations I've ever had. Pleasure to meet you and hope to see you soon again.
Great. Thank you so much.
Take care, man. Have a great day.
Okay.
Bye.
Stuff. Okay.